What would you do if the worst night of your life, the night you were thrown out with your 3 little daughters just because they were girls, tonight, I'm telling you the unbelievable story of Grace Jennings, a young mother with nowhere to go, no money, no one to call, just 3 tiny hands clinging to her as the city turned its back on them. She thought the next person who walked up would be danger or judgment, but the man who stepped out of that black car wasn't a stranger who felt sorry for her. He was Vincent Moretti, the name people in Chicago whisper when they're afraid. And trust me, what happened next will shock you, so watch till the end, because the twist changes everything. If you enjoy intense, emotional stories like this, subscribe right now, and in the comments tell me, where are you watching from? A cold November rain pelted down in stinging sheets, turning the deserted suburban street into a blur of silver. On a broken park bench beneath a flickering street lamp, a lone woman huddled with her 3 children. Her thin cotton dress, once a vibrant blue, was soaked and clung to her shivering form. In her arms, she cradled an infant wrapped in a damp blanket, and at her feet, 2 little girls clung to her legs. The toddlers' dark curls were plastered to their small faces, their tears mixing with rain as they trembled with cold and fear. The baby gave a weak, whimpering cry, more a kitten's mewl than a wail, and the woman rocked her gently, humming a broken lullaby. "Shh, it's okay, my darlings. Mommy's here," she crooned, her voice cracking on the lie. Nothing was okay, nothing at all. They had nowhere to go, no warm home, no dry clothes, not even a few dollars left in her pocket. She had fled with only a diaper bag and the clothes on their backs. Now that bag sat beside her on the bench, rainwater seeping through the canvas. Everything inside was drenched. The spare onesies, the last 2 diapers, the nearly empty formula canister and battered baby bottle. Useless now, like the aching hollow in her chest where hope had lived before tonight. Grace Jennings squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back another surge of tears. It all still felt unreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Barely an hour ago, she had been standing in the foyer of her husband's family mansion, an elegant prison that had been her home for 5 long years. She could still see the scene replaying behind her eyelids, the towering mahogany doors flung wide open, rain blowing in as Andrew's enraged voice echoed off marble floors. 3 girls, 3 useless girls. Her husband's face had twisted with disgust as he snarled those words that shattered her soul. "You've shamed me for the last time, Grace. Get out. Take your daughters and go, before I lose what little patience I have left." She had stood there in shock, a newborn baby in her arms and her 2 toddlers clutching her skirt, hardly able to breathe. He can't mean it. But he did. From behind Andrew's shoulder, his father barked in cold agreement, his fury filling the grand entry hall. "We need a son to carry the Whitman name. You failed to give us one. You failed this family." Moments later, a pair of estate servants had seized her by the arms. Before Grace could even process what was happening, she was being hustled out into the storm. "No, wait, please," she had begged, desperate, but they shoved her onto the front steps without mercy. One servant thrust the diaper bag at her, the other yanked the heavy oak doors shut with a resounding boom that drowned out her cries. Just like that, she was cast out into the cold night with her 3 terrified children and nowhere to go. The Whitman family's final gift, banishment. Now here she was, soaked and shivering under a sliver of park shelter, her heart reduced to ashes. Rain ran down her face, mingling with silent tears that she no longer bothered to wipe away. Grace tasted salt on her lips and realized she was crying openly, but the storm hid every tear. Maybe it's better this way, she thought in despair. If she simply vanished into the dark, maybe her girls might stand a chance. Maybe somehow, life would be kinder to them without her. But even as the thought flickered, she knew it was a lie born of hopelessness. If she gave up, what would become of her daughters? They had only her now. Their father didn't want them. No one in the Whitman family had even bothered to hold the new baby before slamming the door in their faces. Grace was the only person left in the world who loved these girls, and love them she did, more than life itself. She had to keep going for them, even if each breath felt like agony. A crack of thunder ripped across the sky, making the middle child, 3-year-old Sophie, shriek and bury her face against Grace's side. Grace blinked away rain and tears, forcing herself to focus. She shifted the blanketed infant in one arm and wrapped her free arm around Sophie, pulling the toddler close. With numb fingers, she stroked her eldest daughter's soaked hair. 4-year-old Emma was quiet, except for soft sniffles, her thumb jammed in her mouth, something she hadn't done in over a year. Emma's wide, frightened eyes kept flicking up to her mother's face, searching for answers that Grace didn't have. "Mama," Emma whimpered, voice quavering, "where's Daddy? Why isn't he here?" That simple question sliced through Grace like a knife. How could she explain to a 4-year-old that her father had abandoned them because they weren't born the way he wanted? Because in his eyes, being girls made them somehow not good enough? Grace opened her mouth, 1,000 tangled, painful words choking in her throat. What could she possibly say? The truth, that Andrew only valued a son and saw his daughters as worthless? That he was worthless for thinking that? The bitter answer burned on her tongue, but she couldn't bring herself to speak it aloud. "Daddy," she began weakly, but her voice failed. Rain drummed on the leaves above, filling the silence. Emma's face crumpled with confusion and hurt. Grace's heart seized. She had to say something, anything, to ease her child's pain. But before she could find the words, another low rumble of thunder rolled through the night. The baby in Grace's arms let out a thin, distressed wail, as if echoing her sister's fear. Grace swallowed hard and mustered a soft, false brightness in her tone. "Daddy's not coming, sweetheart," she whispered, hugging Emma and Sophie closer against each side. "But I'm here. I won't leave you, I promise." Her lips trembled as she pressed them to the baby's damp forehead, trying to calm the infant's cries. "I'm here," she repeated silently in her mind, hoping somehow the promise would reach their little hearts. She only wished she could believe it herself. Inside, Grace felt as fragile as a fallen leaf, crumbling under the weight of failure and fear. She was so cold, so hungry, so utterly exhausted, and even more frightened than her girls. What would morning bring if they made it through this night? She had no money, no shelter, no phone, nothing but sheer will and desperate love keeping her going. Another gust of wind lashed at them, and the freezing rain found every gap in their scant shelter. The park around them was completely deserted at this late hour. Even the distant highway was quiet. There was no one to hear Sophie's soft sobs or the baby's weakening cries. Grace's pulse fluttered wildly with panic. No one is coming. We're alone. If she didn't find help, how long before the cold stole the little strength her children had left? The infant's tiny body was far too still against her breast. Grace rocked them and began to pray under her breath. "Please, somebody, help us." Her tears fell freely now. "Mama's got you, babies," she crooned, voice wavering as she tried to sound soothing instead of terrified. She pressed her cheek against her infant daughter's cold, pallid face. "Just hold on. Please, hold on." Lightning cracked across the sky, a jagged bolt that illuminated the desolate playground and empty swing sets nearby. In that flash of stark white light, Grace glimpsed her reflection in the puddle at her feet, a gaunt, drenched woman clutching her children with despair in her eyes. She barely recognized herself. A sob rose in her throat. She bowed her head over her baby and closed her eyes, silently begging anyone, anything out there for a miracle. A glow pierced through the rain, startling her eyes open. Twin beams of light cut across the flooded pavement, growing brighter. Grace's breath caught. Through the curtain of rain, she saw a large black car slow as it approached the park. Its headlights splashed yellow across the bench and rusted trash barrel nearby. For a split second, hope and fear warred in her chest. Who would be driving here in this storm? This neighborhood was a quiet residential area on the edge of town. The Whitmans' walled estate backed onto this park, but few others came here at night. Grace shrank back instinctively, her pulse quickening. Could it be Andrew's car? Had he actually sent someone to find them? The sleek black sedan rolled to a stop a few yards away, engine purring smoothly. It was definitely not Andrew's sedan. His was silver. This car was larger, longer, expensive. Too expensive for anyone she knew around here. The windows were tinted dark. Grace felt Sophie grip her leg tighter, whimpering. Heart pounding, Grace pulled her daughters behind her legs as best she could and tried to make herself small against the bench, sheltering the children with her body. Dread coiled in her stomach. If this wasn't help, if it was someone with bad intentions. They were so vulnerable. She had no phone to call 911, no strength to run, nothing to defend her babies but her own body. The back door of the car opened, and a tall man stepped out into the rain. He immediately unfurled a large black umbrella. Grace's breath quickened. In the dim, flickering streetlight, she could just make out the broad shape of his shoulders beneath a charcoal gray overcoat or suit jacket. Whoever he was, he moved with calm, unhurried purpose, as if a midnight downpour didn't bother him at all. Umbrella held aloft, he turned and began striding directly toward the bench where Grace cowered with her girls. Grace's heart slammed against her ribs. He's coming straight for us. Instinct screamed at her to run, but her legs were like stone. There was nowhere to go anyway. She staggered to her feet, knees nearly buckling from cold and fatigue. Planting herself between the approaching stranger and her children, she flung her arms out protectively. Rain plastered her hair to her face and blurred her vision, but she forced her voice into a fierce, raw shout. "Stop! Please! Stay back!" The man halted a few steps away. Raindrops drummed on the canopy of his umbrella, cascading around him. In the uneven light, Grace could finally see him more clearly. He was tall, well over 6 feet, and dressed far too well for this miserable weather. A tailored charcoal suit clung to his frame, the fine fabric spattered with rain. A gust blew a bit of water under his umbrella, causing him to tilt it slightly. That's when Grace caught a glimpse of his face. She nearly gasped. The stranger's features looked like they'd been carved from stone, strong, clean lines of a square jaw and high cheekbones. His hair was jet black, slicked back, but now damp at the edges from the wind. Dark eyebrows slashed over eyes that were deep-set and intensely focused on her. It was a hard face, intimidating in its sternness, yet not cruel. Despite her panic, Grace noticed a subtle crease of concern in his brow as he took in the sight of her. A soaking, wet mother trembling with an infant in her arms and 2 little girls clinging to her skirt. He lifted his free hand slowly, drawing her attention. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said in a low, calm voice. He opened his hand in a gesture of peace. "Look, empty." His tone was smooth, carrying through the rain without a shout, but it held an authority that rooted Grace to the spot. The stranger kept a respectful distance, his piercing eyes steady on hers. "You're going to freeze to death out here. Let me help you." Grace stared at him, uncertain and shivering violently now that she was on her feet. The cold and rain had nearly numbed her fingers and legs. What do you want?" she choked out. Lightning flared again, casting a fleeting bright halo around him. He didn't look like any good Samaritan she'd imagined. If anything, with his powerful build and crisp suit, he looked like some dark prince stepping out of the storm. Everything about him whispered danger and power. Why would a man like that stop in a deserted park in the middle of the night? He took a small step closer, still several paces away. The warm glow of the street lamp fell across his face, and Grace saw no hint of malice there, only a kind of grim resolve. "You'll catch your death in this weather," he said, raising his voice just enough to be heard over the downpour. "It isn't safe for you or your children." He nodded toward the little ones peeking around her legs. His gaze softened almost imperceptibly at the sight of the baby, whimpering against Grace's shoulder. "There's a shelter not far, or a hospital." No, Grace croaked, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. The word burst out before she could think. Fear of hospitals, of being found, overrode her caution. If they went to a public shelter or hospital, Andrew's powerful family might track her down, maybe even try to take the girls. She couldn't risk it. She shook her head frantically, fresh tears burning in her eyes. No, nowhere to go. It was all she could manage. The truth, bare and hopeless, hung between them. The stranger's jaw tightened. For a second, his eyes flashed with some emotion Grace couldn't name. Anger? Empathy? He hesitated, then slowly lowered his umbrella slightly, stepping nearer. Now he stood directly in the thin cone of light. He appeared to be in his early 30s. Rain blew under the umbrella, streaking across the shoulders of what Grace now saw was a charcoal overcoat, worn over his suit. A stray lock of raven hair had fallen loose on his forehead, dripping rainwater. He didn't so much as flinch at the cold. Up close, he was even more striking. Handsome, perhaps, if his expression hadn't been so severe. A faint scar slashed through his left eyebrow, a pale line that only added to his rugged demeanor. Yet those dark eyes of his. They were locked on Grace with an intensity that made her shiver for reasons unrelated to the cold. He carefully crouched down a few inches, trying to meet her at eye level without looming. Grace instinctively tightened her protective hold on the baby and on Sophie's hand. She was trembling head to toe, but stood her ground as thunder rumbled again. The man's voice gentled. "What's your name?" he asked. Grace blinked rain out of her eyes. She wasn't sure why, but the question disarmed her. She hadn't heard a gentle tone from a man in She couldn't even remember how long. Grace, she managed. Her throat was raw. Grace Jennings. Using her maiden name felt strange, but she would never call herself Whitman again. He inclined his head. Grace, I'm Vincent Moretti. There was a weight to that name, as if she should recognize it. Grace's mind was sluggish from cold and shock. The name tugged at something in her memory. A news story? Local gossip? She wasn't sure. He continued calmly. I have a dry car right here. There's a safe place you can go, just a few minutes from here. There will be heat and food and warm clothes for your children. He paused, his deep voice resolute. I promise you'll be safe. Safe. The word sounded like heaven. But Grace swayed on her feet, torn by indecision. Trust a stranger? But what choice did she have? The world spun dizzily around her from exhaustion and cold. Sophie was sobbing softly again, and Emma's eyes were half closed now, her small body shaking uncontrollably. The baby's cries were growing weaker. Grace could feel how chilled her tiny feet were, even through the blanket. If they stayed out here much longer, a sob of desperation escaped Grace's lips. Why would you help us? She whispered, voice barely audible above the rain. She'd learned the hard way that people, even those who claimed to love you, did nothing for free. What could he possibly gain from helping a penniless mother and her kids? Vincent Moretti's face changed at her question. For a moment, something almost tender flickered in his eyes, as if her words had struck a hidden chord. He looked at her children huddled around her, and then back into Grace's eyes. Because I know what it looks like when someone's been thrown away, he said quietly, and I know what it feels like to have nothing left to lose. Grace just stared, rainwater trickling down her lashes. There was no pity in his tone, only a grim understanding. In that moment, Grace felt an uncanny certainty that this man truly saw her, saw the humiliation and fear she'd been subjected to, and hated it. Her knees weakened, a rush of dizzy relief and confusion swirling inside her. Vincent took a careful step forward. Gently, he began shrugging off his overcoat. Please, let me help you, he said, almost a murmur. Grace stood frozen as he removed the coat and approached. Before she could protest, Vincent draped the blessedly warm, dry overcoat around Grace's shoulders, encompassing the baby and Sophie as well under its wide expanse. The sudden warmth made Grace gasp aloud. After the relentless cold, the wool felt like a hug of heat. More surprising still was the careful way he arranged it, ensuring the baby's face was shielded from the rain. His hands did not touch Grace directly, yet she could feel their steadiness as he adjusted the collar around her neck. Beneath the coat's subtle scent of expensive cologne, sandalwood and smoke, Grace caught a hint of something else. Safety. Her composure nearly cracked. She bit back a sob and clutched the coat's lapels tightly with trembling hands. Thank you, she managed brokenly. The baby had fallen silent. Comforted by the sudden insulation, Vincent gave a single nod. No need to thank me. He carefully slipped off his suit jacket next. He had been wearing it under the overcoat, and moved toward Emma, who stood shivering in only a soaked sundress. May I? He asked Grace softly. Grace found herself nodding, too numb to speak. Vincent knelt and wrapped the dry suit jacket around Emma's small shoulders. The little girl looked up at this imposing stranger with huge, frightened eyes. Vincent offered what might have been a reassuring smile. Its subtle gentleness transformed his stern face for an instant. It's okay, little one. This will keep you warm. His voice was low and oddly soothing. Emma sniffled, her thumb still in her mouth, but didn't resist as he bundled her up. Grace's heart squeezed. In 5 years, she had never seen her powerful, wealthy husband so much as pick up a towel to help their children. Yet here was a stranger in a rainstorm, ruining his fine clothes just to keep her girls warm. Come with me to the car, Vincent said, rising to his full height again. He motioned with the umbrella toward the idling sedan. I promise, Grace, no harm will come to you. I have food, warm blankets, everything you need. Just give me a chance to prove it. He sounded almost pleading now. Grace looked down at Sophie and Emma, then at the tiny, innocent face of her baby daughter nestled against her. The thought of getting them out of this freezing rain, even for a moment, was too powerful to resist. Her instinct still whispered caution, but the mother in her was overriding all else. If there was even a chance this man meant what he said, could she afford not to take it? Finally, with a shaky breath, Grace gave a slight nod. Oh, okay. Relief swept across Vincent's face. He exhaled, as if he'd been holding his breath waiting for her answer. Without another word, he extended a strong arm toward Grace. Hold on to me, he said. Grace hesitated only a second before shifting her baby in her left arm and grasping Vincent's forearm with her right hand. His sleeve was damp and cold, but beneath it, she felt solid muscle and warmth. "Easy," he murmured as she stepped forward. Her legs were so stiff and weak that the world tilted. She nearly collapsed, but Vincent caught her effortlessly by the elbow. His grip was firm and steady, not allowing her to fall. Grace flushed with embarrassment. She hated feeling weak, but when she sent him a grateful, trembling glance, he simply gave a curt, reassuring nod. With Vincent's support, Grace managed to gather her girls and follow him. A second man, whom Grace hadn't even noticed in her days, was now standing by the car with another umbrella. He must be the driver. He wore a black cap and kept his eyes politely averted as Vincent led Grace and the children over. The driver stepped forward to open the rear door wide. "Sir," the driver said respectfully, giving Vincent a nod and then offering a gentle smile to Grace. "Ma'am, let's get you out of the rain." One by one, Grace lifted her children into the plush back seat. First Sophie, then Emma, wrapping Vincent's suit jacket snugly around them. Even as thunder boomed again, the two toddlers curled together, lulled by the promise of shelter. Clutching her baby tightly, Grace ducked into the car. The sudden warmth inside took her breath away. It was as if she'd stepped into summer after a long winter. The leather seat, the soft glow of console lights. She almost sobbed from sheer relief as the door closed, muffling the chaos of the storm outside. Rain drummed on the roof, but inside was quiet and dim. Vincent slid into the seat beside her, pulling the door shut. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Grace sagged back against the seat, feeling truly safe for the first time in days. Her whole body began to shake uncontrollably, now that the immediate danger had passed. Reaction setting in, she realized she was still clutching Vincent's overcoat around herself and the baby. Across the car, Sophie and Emma were curled up under the coat's other half. They stared wide-eyed at the spacious interior. It smelled of leather and something faintly spicy. The doors were thick, the world outside reduced to the faint howl of wind. "Here." Vincent's voice was soft. Grace turned to see him leaning toward her, concern etched on his features. He reached over and gently fastened the seatbelt around her and the baby. His fingers brushed the blanket, checking that the infant's face was uncovered. "Is she okay?" he asked, nodding at the baby. Grace swallowed, feeling the sting of tears again, this time in gratitude. I think so," she said. "She's just cold." As if on cue, the baby gave a weak fuss, and Grace adjusted the blanket over the little one's head. The toddler girls were silent now. Exhaustion and warmth were overtaking them, their eyes heavy. Vincent tapped on the glass partition separating the back seat from the driver's area. The window slid down with a faint electric hum. The driver, Liu, Grace thought Vincent had called him, peered back. "Yes, boss?" "Take us home," Vincent instructed, "and turn up the heat for the back." "Right away," the driver nodded. Grace heard a quiet click and felt warm air begin to flow from vents near her feet. Home, he had said home. Grace looked down at her lap, at the tiny hand of her baby curled trustingly against her breast. Where exactly are we going? The thought hit her through the fog in her mind. She had no idea who Vincent Moretti really was, beyond a name that rang some distant bell. No idea where his home was, or why he had been out here tonight. Fear began to nibble at her again. She was in a stranger's car, a very expensive car, with her children, heading to an unknown destination. But when she dared a sideways glance at Vincent, she found him watching her and the girls with a steady, guarded expression. In the dim cabin light, the harsh lines of his face had softened slightly. He looked tired, she realized. There was a weariness in his dark eyes that hadn't been evident on the rain-soaked street. Grace mustered a hoarse whisper. Where?" The question barely formed before she winced. Her throat hurt, voice rasping from cold and crying. Vincent seemed to understand. "I'm taking you somewhere warm and safe," he said. "My house." He paused, then added quietly, "It's not far, and you don't have to stay if you're not comfortable, just long enough to get you and your children dry and fed. Then we can figure out whatever you want to do next." Grace nodded numbly. His house. Her mind whirled. Why would a wealthy man take in a complete stranger and her kids? She couldn't comprehend it, yet here she was in his car. She opened her mouth to express the confusion and hesitant gratitude swirling inside her, but at that moment the baby started to fuss louder. A thin, hungry cry. "Shh, shh," Grace murmured, automatically rocking her. She realized with a pang that it had been hours since the baby last had any milk. Her own stomach was twisted in hunger, and likely the baby was starving. Grimacing, Grace reached down to the sodden diaper bag at her feet. With one hand, she fumbled through it, searching for the baby's bottle or formula, anything. The overhead light was too dim, and her fingers were stiff. The only bottle she found was empty, and the small can of formula was soaked, and half of its contents gone. A wave of helplessness crashed over her. The baby's cries sharpened. She rooted blindly against Grace's collarbone, seeking milk that Grace could no longer provide. Her body had long dried up under stress. "Oh God, I know, sweetie, I know," Grace whispered, her voice cracking as she tried to hold back tears of frustration. Her hands shook so violently she almost dropped the bottle. "Hey," came Vincent's gentle rumble beside her. Grace felt him shift closer. "It's okay. We'll take care of it." He rapped lightly on the partition again. The driver slid it open without a word. "Liu, stop at the first open convenience store or pharmacy you find," Vincent ordered. "Yes, sir," Liu responded immediately, the car already signaling for a turn. Through the rain-blurred window, Grace saw they were leaving the park road and heading toward the main avenue. She released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. He's going to get formula. The relief was so intense that it left her dizzy. Grace pressed her forehead against the back of the seat in front of her, closing her eyes. A quiet, tearful thank you tumbled from her lips. She wasn't even sure if she was thanking Vincent or God, or pure dumb luck, maybe all three. Within minutes, the sedan pulled under the awning of an all-night convenience store. Rain pounded on the concrete outside. Vincent touched Grace's arm lightly. "I'll be right back," he said. He reached into the console and pulled out a large black umbrella, then surprised Grace by pressing it into her hand. "Hold on to this. Keep the rain off the baby if the door opens, okay?" "Oh, okay." She grasped the umbrella, though puzzled. "But what about you?" Vincent had already popped open the door. A blast of wind sent a spray of droplets in before Grace fumbled the umbrella open inside to shield the back seat. Vincent flashed her the faintest hint of a reassuring smile. "Don't worry about me." Without taking the umbrella for himself, he dashed out into the storm. Grace watched, astonished, as he jogged across the parking lot, getting utterly drenched in seconds. The convenience store's neon sign lit his tall figure briefly before he disappeared inside. As quickly as he left, he returned. It could not have been more than a couple of minutes before Grace saw the doors of the store slide open and Vincent emerge, clutching 2 plastic bags in one hand and a small black umbrella in the other, likely purchased on the spot. He sprinted back to the car through puddles. Grace hurriedly closed the umbrella she'd been holding and opened the car door for him from inside. He slid in, dripping wet but triumphant. Immediately, he pulled out a bright pink baby bottle still in its packaging and a canister of formula. He was soaked through, the once neat charcoal pants and white dress shirt plastered to his skin, but Vincent paid no mind. "Let's get this warmed up," he muttered to himself. He unscrewed a silver thermos he'd grabbed from the store and poured some water into the new bottle, mixing in scoops of formula with swift efficiency. Grace watched in amazement as he worked, hands steady even as water dripped from his hair onto his lashes. Within moments, he had the bottle prepared. He shook it, then tested a drop on the inside of his wrist like a practiced parent. Satisfied, Vincent carefully handed the bottle over to Grace. "Here, it's warm, not hot." Grace didn't even have words. She took the bottle with her free hand and guided the nipple into her infant's searching mouth. The baby latched on hungrily. A weak but grateful little sigh left the child's throat as she began to drink. Grace felt tears flood her eyes again. She bowed her head over her baby, whispering soothing words of comfort, while relief and gratitude overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she breathed to Vincent, her voice trembling. I don't know how to—" "There's no need," Vincent interrupted quietly. Grace looked up to see him watching her feed the baby, an unreadable expression on his face. He gave a curt nod, then seemed to remember something else. From one of the plastic bags, he withdrew 2 small foil-wrapped packages. I got these too, for the older girls." He peeled one open to reveal a chocolate-covered granola bar. The rich scent of cocoa wafted through the car. Grace's stomach clenched painfully. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten either. Vincent reached across gently to hand the bar to Sophie and Emma, who were now wide-eyed and sitting up at the smell of food. "Go on, it's yours," he encouraged softly. Sophie looked to Grace for permission, and Grace nodded. With shaking little hands, Sophie took the bar and broke it in half, giving the bigger piece to her big sister. Emma offered the tiniest ghost of a smile to Vincent, then they both munched ravenously. Within seconds, the bar was gone, and both girls were licking melted chocolate from their fingers. Vincent actually chuckled under his breath, the sound low and warm. "Poor kids must be starving," he said. He produced 2 more granola bars from the bag and set them on the seat for later. Then he retrieved a towel. Apparently he'd bought that too, and briskly rubbed it over his drenched hair and face. Grace managed an exhausted smile as Sophie and Emma's heads began to bob with drowsiness again, their bellies finally content. The baby was suckling more slowly now, eyes drifting closed. Grace's own body sagged with relief into the leather seat, though adrenaline still coursed through her. This stranger, Vincent Moretti, had swept in like some dark night and provided everything they desperately needed within a span of 15 minutes. He was like a force of nature. Where did you come from?" Grace murmured, more to herself than him, wonder in her tired voice. Vincent paused, toweling off, and glanced at her, his intense eyes catching the passing streetlights as the car started moving again. For a heartbeat, he didn't answer, and Grace worried she'd asked a stupid question. But then one corner of his mouth lifted in a wry half-smile. "Not from around here, that's for sure," he said. Then he turned serious. "I was driving by on my way home. I have business in this area tonight. If I'd taken my usual route, I might not have seen you at all." He frowned slightly, as if the very thought bothered him. Call it chance. Chance. Or a miracle, Grace thought. She adjusted the now empty bottle and slowly pulled it from the baby's lips. Her infant daughter gave a tiny hiccup and burrowed into Grace's chest, slipping into a contented sleep. Grace's heart swelled. For the first time all night, her daughter's faces were peaceful, not contorted in fear or misery. She would never forget that Vincent had given her this gift. The tires hissed along wet roads. Grace realized she must have nodded off for a moment when she felt the car slow and make a turn. She blinked, forcing herself awake. They were passing through tall wrought iron gates. Warm, golden light spilled down a long driveway lined with evergreens. Grace's breath caught as a sprawling estate came into view ahead, an imposing Tudor-style mansion with ivy-covered walls and leaded windows glowing in the darkness. It looked like something out of another world compared to the sterile, ultra-modern Whitman house she'd lived in. Somehow this grand house looked both ancient and welcoming, with soft lights twinkling behind drawn curtains and a pathway of lanterns leading to the entrance. Vincent noticed her wide eyes. This is your home?" Grace whispered. It was the first real word she'd spoken since feeding the baby. "Yes," he said simply. He studied her face, reading the wariness and awe there. Quietly he added, "And now it will be a safe place for you and your girls, for as long as you need." The car came to a gentle stop under the front portico. Almost immediately, 2 figures emerged through the oversized oak front doors, a woman in a neat black dress and apron, and an older man carrying a leather doctor's bag. Grace tensed up reflexively at seeing strangers, but Vincent touched her shoulder lightly. "It's okay," he reassured. "That's my housekeeper, Maria, and Dr. Thompson. I asked him to come check on the children." The housekeeper, Maria, opened the car door, and warm light and the scent of wood smoke wafted in. "Oh, you poor things," Maria clucked softly as she peered at Grace and the little ones. She had kind eyes and a gentle smile. Grace nodded numbly, allowing Maria to help her out of the car. Her legs were unsteady on the wet gravel drive, but Vincent was instantly at her side. He gently scooped a half-asleep Sophie into his arms so Grace could step out with the baby and support Emma with her free hand. Sophie murmured in confusion, then settled against Vincent's shoulder with surprising ease. He handled the 3-year-old as if he'd done it 100 times, one large hand cradling the back of her head to shield her from the drizzle. Grace followed Maria toward the doors, her eyes darting around anxiously. But the older woman's calm demeanor eased some of her jitters. "Let's get you all inside and warm, dear," Maria said. Behind them, Dr. Thompson and the driver were already retrieving the diaper bag and other items from the car. Vincent walked by Grace's side up the steps, still carrying Sophie. Emma clung to Grace's dress, thumb creeping back into her mouth as she stared around at the unfamiliar surroundings with tired apprehension. Inside, the entry hall was grand but surprisingly cozy. A fire crackled in a stone hearth at one end, and the soft glow of lamps lit richly paneled walls and polished hardwood floors. Thick rugs cushioned their steps. Grace felt the blessed caress of warmth on her chilled skin, and almost wanted to cry again. She hadn't been truly warm in days. Everything was happening so fast, she couldn't quite catch her breath. This was Vincent's home, yes, but to her it was still a stranger's house. Anxiety warred with relief inside her. Maria guided them into a spacious living room off the main hall. Sit here, dear, she urged, pointing to a plush velvet sofa near the fire. Grace sank down gratefully, arms aching as she continued to hold both Emma and the baby. Vincent settled beside her, carefully lowering Sophie onto the couch between them. The little girl promptly curled against Grace, nestling her face into her mother's lap. Grace smoothed Sophie's damp hair from her forehead and kissed her, feeling her heart slow its frantic pace now that all 3 children were safe and warm by the fire. Dr. Thompson, a silver-haired man with kind, fatherly features, crouched beside the sofa. "Mr. Moretti called me to have a look at everyone," he said gently, addressing Grace. "May I?" He indicated the baby first. Grace bit her lip, reluctant to loosen her protective hold, but then she nodded, letting him slide his stethoscope under the blanket. He listened, checked the baby's temperature with a quick ear thermometer from his bag, and examined her tiny fingers and toes. Then he moved on to Sophie and Emma, giving each sleepy girl a gentle once-over for any signs of hypothermia or injury. "All fine," Dr. Thompson pronounced after a few minutes, cold and exhausted, but nothing a warm bath and rest won't fix. "The baby's a tough little one, breathing clear, good heartbeat. She'll be right as rain by morning." He repacked his tools and stood. "Grace," he said, meeting her eyes, "you did well keeping them safe. Now it's your turn to recover." Grace managed a faint smile at that. Recover. If only it were that simple. But at least physically, she was okay. Frozen, hungry, worn to the bone. But okay. Thank you," she murmured. Dr. Thompson patted her shoulder. "Get warm, get some food. I'll come by tomorrow to check in." With a nod to Vincent and Maria, he took his leave quietly. Maria clapped her hands softly. "All right, let's get these little angels into a hot bath and some cozy clothes." The housekeeper's voice was cheerful, but gentle, as if mindful not to startle the girls. She beckoned to Grace. "We've prepared a guest suite for you all, with a big tub and plenty of towels." Grace hesitated. Her legs felt like lead, and she glanced at Vincent uncertainly. He stood near the fireplace now, having taken off his soaked overcoat at some point. He'd also removed his ruined dress shirt. Now he wore a black woolen sweater that fit his broad chest snugly. His dark hair was towel-dried into loose waves. Meeting Grace's eyes, Vincent gave a small nod of encouragement. "Go on," he said in a low voice. "It's all right. Maria will take good care of you. I'll be right here if you need anything." His assurance eased the last thread of Grace's hesitation. She allowed Maria to help her stand. Vincent stepped forward immediately, lifting Sophie again so Grace wouldn't have to carry all 3 kids at once. Emma toddled at Grace's side, clutching her hand. The next half hour passed in a blur of blessed warmth and comfort. Maria led them down a hall to the promised guest suite, an inviting set of rooms with a crackling fireplace, a large canopied bed, and an attached bathroom that boasted the deepest bathtub Grace had ever seen. The hot bath that followed felt like pure heaven. Grace nearly wept as she lowered her weary body and her 2 older girls into the steamy water. The girls whimpered at first, their chilled skin stinging as it warmed, but soon they relaxed and even giggled as Maria brought out a small basket of bath toys. Baby Lily, for that was what Grace had named her youngest, got her turn too. Grace cradled the infant carefully in the shallow end of the tub, washing the rain and stress from her tiny body, while Lily kicked her feet and gave a single precious coo. Afterwards, Maria wrapped each child in thick, heated towels and helped Grace towel off as well. Fresh clothes awaited, soft flannel pajamas for Emma and Sophie, one set decorated with little ducks, the other with pink bunnies, and a footed sleeper for the baby. Grace's eyes stung at the simple kindness of it. For herself, Maria offered a comfortable pair of women's pajamas, crisp and clean, far nicer than anything Grace still owned. Slipping into the borrowed clothes, Grace felt an unexpected sense of relief so profound it was almost an ache. We're safe. We're really safe. At least for tonight. The girls, worn out from the ordeal, were nodding off as soon as they were dry. Maria guided them back into the bedroom, where she had already turned down the covers on the big canopy bed. Grace hesitated. Should she really let them use such an extravagant bed? But Maria gave her no chance to protest, ushering her forward. Too tired to argue, Grace gently laid Sophie and Emma on the fluffy pillows, tucking the comforter up to their chins. They snuggled together, Sophie's arm draped protectively over her big sister, even in sleep. Grace placed Lily, already half asleep after a second small feeding, in the middle, nestled safely between the older girls. The baby made a tiny sound and then settled, her rosebud mouth opening in a yawn. For a long moment, Grace simply stood at the bedside, gazing at her 3 little girls. They looked so peaceful, so angelic with their lashes resting on flushed cheeks. The horrible events of the night felt like a distant bad dream in this gentle lamplight. My babies. Emotion clogged Grace's throat. They're okay. In the end, that was all that mattered. She became aware of Maria hovering nearby with a hairbrush and a look of maternal concern. "Come now, dear," the housekeeper said softly. "Let's get you taken care of too. Sit by the fire and I'll brush out this beautiful hair." Grace opened her mouth to politely decline. She didn't want to trouble this kind woman further, but before any words came, a deep exhaustion rolled over her in a wave. Her limbs felt like jelly, her head light from hunger and relief. So instead, she found herself obeying with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Maria," she murmured as she settled into a plush armchair by the fire. Maria beamed. "You're very welcome. And please, call me Maria. Yes. Now just relax." She began to gently work the brush through Grace's long, damp hair. Each stroke was calming, almost hypnotic. Grace closed her eyes, letting the warmth of the fireplace and the rhythmic tug of the brush lull her. She couldn't remember the last time someone had done something so tender for her. Maybe her mother, when Grace was a child herself. That thought brought a pang. Her parents had passed years ago, never meeting their granddaughters, never knowing the pain their daughter would endure. A tear slipped down Grace's cheek, and she quickly wiped it away. "Don't cry. It's over. You survived." Maria finished braiding Grace's hair loosely to one side. "All done. Feel a bit better?" she asked. Grace nodded. "Yes, much better," she said softly. Her voice was still hoarse but steadier now. She truly did feel human again, albeit an exhausted human, clean, warm, and on the verge of sleep. "Good," Maria smiled. "Now, if you don't mind, I'll go fetch a bit of supper. You need to eat, love. I'll be back in a jiffy." Before Grace could insist she wasn't hungry or protest the trouble, her stomach rumbled audibly. Maria chuckled. "I heard that. No arguments." With that, the housekeeper gave her a playful wink and slipped out of the suite, closing the door partway behind her. Silence enveloped the cozy room. Grace drew her legs up beneath her in the armchair, wrapping the knitted throw from its back around her shoulders. She felt strangely shy now that she was alone in his house. Well, not truly alone. Her girls were here, and Vincent and his staff were around somewhere. But in this quiet moment, with nothing but the crackle of the fire and the soft breathing of her sleeping children, the reality of the situation settled heavily on her. In the span of a few hours, her entire life had been upended. She had gone from being the unwanted wife of a ruthless man to, what exactly? A guest under the protection of another powerful man. One who was a complete stranger to her, yet who had shown more care and compassion than she'd seen in years. Grace's eyes drifted to the door, half expecting Vincent to appear. Would he? Or would he keep his distance now? She realized she didn't even know if he lived here alone, and or if perhaps a wife or family lurked somewhere. But the house, while well kept, had felt quiet. No toys, no personal feminine touches in the areas she'd seen. It struck her that maybe Vincent Moretti lived a solitary life in this big mansion. A gentle knock on the doorframe cut into her thoughts. Grace sat up, clutching the throw close. "Yes?" Vincent stood in the doorway, not quite stepping in. He had one hand braced lightly against the frame, and his gaze was cast down, as if careful to give her privacy. "May I come in?" he asked quietly. Grace's heart fluttered at the sight of him here, in the soft lamplight of the suite. He had changed into dry clothes, dark trousers and a gray cashmere sweater that looked impossibly soft. It made him seem less forbidding, though still every bit the lord of this manor. She suddenly recalled how she'd yelled at him to stay back in the park, not recognizing he was her savior. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "Oh, of course," she said quickly. "Please." Vincent stepped inside and closed the door gently behind him. His eyes immediately went to the bed, where the 3 children slept soundly. His shoulders eased a fraction at the peaceful sight. "They're okay?" he asked in a soft murmur. Grace nodded, following his gaze. "Yes, thanks to you. They're okay." She swallowed, then met his eyes earnestly. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Moretti. You saved our lives tonight." Vincent's eyes flickered. "It's Vincent," he said. He moved toward the fireplace, his tall form swathed in dancing amber light. He seemed suddenly uncomfortable, almost sheepish. "And you don't owe me any thanks. I only did what anyone with a conscience would do." He paused, then corrected himself quietly. "Well, Perhaps not anyone, but what I had to do. Grace watched him, curiosity tugging at her. In that moment, he didn't resemble the intimidating figure who'd first approached her. There was a gentleness in the way he looked at the sleeping children, a heaviness in how he carried himself, like a man bearing old wounds. What pain hides behind those eyes, she wondered, realizing she hadn't introduced herself properly either. Grace managed a small smile. "My name is Grace," she said again softly. "Grace Jennings. And these are my daughters, Emma, Sophie, and Lily." She pointed to each child in turn. Well, until tonight, we lived in the Whitman estate on the other side of that park." At the mention of Whitman, Vincent's face hardened subtly. He clearly recognized the name. He murmured, "I know." Of course he did. The Whitmans were one of the wealthiest and most established families in the state. Grace realized then what had nagged at her memory earlier: Moretti. There had been stories in the news and whispers at social gatherings about the Moretti family. Old money, old criminal ties. Suddenly she remembered an article she'd glimpsed once. Businessman or crime boss, Chicago's untouchable Moretti, and an accompanying photo of a stern-faced Vincent leaving a courthouse, flanked by lawyers. The memory sent a jolt through her. She was in the lair of a man many considered as dangerous as he was rich. Yet gazing at him now, as he carefully adjusted the knit blanket over Sophie's tiny shoulder, dangerous wasn't the word in her heart. Protector, savior. Those felt more apt. "I know who you are," she found herself saying. Her voice was barely above a whisper, not accusatory, just acknowledging. You're him, aren't you? Everyone in Chicago knows the name Moretti." Vincent went very still. He straightened from the bedside, meeting her eyes across the room. "And does that frighten you?" he asked, his tone neutral. Grace held his gaze. She thought of the rumors, of violence, power, men who disappeared after crossing the Morettis. But she also thought of Vincent standing in the rain buying formula for her baby, of him wrapping his coat around her shoulders. Slowly, she shook her head. "No, it doesn't." And she meant it. Perhaps she should be afraid, but this man had given her no reason to fear him, only reasons to trust. Something in Vincent's posture relaxed, ever so slightly. He moved to the other armchair by the fire, across from Grace, and sat down. The flame's glow etched highlights in his dark hair and cast shadows over the strong planes of his face. He studied her in silence for a moment. Grace realized he was waiting for her to continue, to tell her story. She drew a steadying breath. The warmth and security of this room, combined with Vincent's patient, attentive presence, coaxed words from her that she'd never thought she'd speak aloud. "Until tonight, I was Grace Whitman," she began softly, "daughter-in-law of Senator Jonathan Whitman and his wife Eleanor. I was married to their son, Andrew, for 5 years." Her throat tightened, but she pressed on. "We have had 3 children together. All girls, and for that, I was thrown out like garbage." The bitterness in her voice surprised her. She hadn't meant to let it seep through. Vincent's jaw visibly clenched, but he said nothing yet, letting her speak. Grace's fingers gripped the armrests hard as she recounted the nightmare of those 5 years. How at first Andrew had been charming, and she a hopeful young bride. How quickly the pressure began for a son, even after Emma's birth. The disappointment and coldness that followed Sophie's arrival 2 years later, when it was another girl. The cruel remarks dropped by her mother-in-law. Well, perhaps 3rd time's the charm, and the way her father-in-law barely acknowledged the girls. Grace spoke haltingly of the loneliness that had crept into her marriage, the way Andrew's touches grew infrequent and his nights out grew longer. By the time she fell pregnant a 3rd time, she was desperate to give him the boy he wanted, foolishly believing it might save their marriage. Tears slipped down her cheeks as she described going into labor early, the complications, her frantic fear for her baby when they whisked the newborn away for a moment, and then Andrew's reaction when told they had another daughter, how he had walked out of the hospital room without a word, leaving her sobbing and alone only an hour after giving birth. Vincent cursed under his breath, a flash of anger blazing in his dark eyes. His hands had curled into fists on his knees. "He left you at the hospital," he said in a low, dangerous voice. Grace nodded, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "He left. His parents didn't come either. A family driver took me and Lily home the next day. I should have known then." She trailed off, then continued bitterly. "This afternoon they held a Family meeting at the estate, Andrew and his parents. They told me straight out that I had failed them by producing daughters, that I was effectively useless to them now. Her voice wavered, recalling those cutting words. When I tried to argue, Andrew's mother said I'd shamed their name. His father said they needed a son as an heir, and if I couldn't provide one, Andrew would find someone who could. He already had someone in mind, I think. The realization stung deeply. Andrew had likely been courting a new wife, maybe even gotten someone else pregnant, well before her third child arrived. How blind she'd been. Grace drew a shaky breath. They gave me 1 hour to pack a bag and leave. It didn't even take that long. There wasn't much left of me to pack. A self-deprecating laugh escaped her, harsh and sad. I grabbed the diaper bag, a few clothes for the girls, my mother's old photo album, not much else. They wouldn't let me take the car, of course, or any money. And then, she gestured helplessly, remembering the hands shoving her and her crying children through the door, the humiliation of being physically thrown out of her own home, neighbors possibly watching from behind curtains. Then I ended up out in the rain. They slammed the door and that was it. The room fell quiet except for the sputter of firewood and the soft snores of little Sophie. Grace realized her hands were trembling. She unclenched them from the chair, embarrassed at how she'd rambled. I'm sorry, she said, her cheeks hot. I didn't mean to unload all that. Don't apologize. Vincent's voice was rough with barely restrained emotion. Grace looked up, surprised to see a fierce glint in his eyes. They are the ones who should be sorry. What they did to you, to your girls. It's monstrous. He leaned forward, forearms braced on his knees, as if trying to contain his anger. The intensity rolling off him was palpable, but Grace knew it wasn't directed at her. It was on her behalf. She offered a tremulous smile. Thank you, she whispered. It felt oddly validating to have someone hear her story and react with outrage instead of indifference or judgment. Vincent took a slow breath, visibly mastering himself. His gaze drifted to the flames dancing in the hearth. When he spoke again, his tone was distant, haunted. When I saw you in that park tonight, I stopped because you reminded me of someone. He paused, his throat working. Someone I cared about, the reason I was even near that neighborhood. He exhaled, and Grace noticed his hands trembling slightly before he clasped them together. Grace, He hesitated, then began again, voice low. I had a younger sister. Her name was Sophia. She fell in love with a man from an old traditional family, wealthy, powerful, and as it turned out, utterly heartless. They married against our family's wishes, and at first we thought she'd be happy. But her husband's parents were furious that he hadn't chosen some high society debutante. They made her life a living hell. Grace listened quietly, heart constricting. She had a feeling she knew where this was going, but her chest tightened in empathy nonetheless. Sophia had 2 little girls back to back, Vincent continued, a faraway look in his eyes. Beautiful children, but her husband's family wanted a son to carry their precious name. They blamed her when it didn't happen. His jaw set hard. The pressure they put on her. It was unbearable. She got pregnant a 3rd time, desperate to give them a boy so they'd accept her. But when she gave birth to another girl, he swallowed, his voice growing thick. They threw her out. In the dead of winter, they cast her out of their estate. 2 small toddlers clinging to her and pregnant with her 3rd child. She had nowhere to go. I didn't find out until it was too late. Sophia tried to walk to the nearest village in a snowstorm. Vincent closed his eyes, pain etched on his face. She collapsed on the road. By the time someone found her, she'd lost the baby, and her own life was hanging by a thread. She never woke up. A soft sob escaped Grace's lips. Oh, Vincent, I'm so sorry. Without thinking, she leaned forward and placed her hand over his clenched fists. He opened his eyes, looking down at her small hand resting atop his larger ones. For a moment, he seemed surprised by the touch, as if unsure what to do. Then he slowly turned his hand under hers, unfurling his fingers to gently clasp her hand in return. His palm was warm and slightly calloused. Grace felt a subtle current pass between them, a shared understanding of loss and sorrow. I couldn't save her, Vincent said, his voice barely a whisper now. I was too late. After that, I vowed never again to stand by while innocents suffer like that. A steely resolve entered his tone as he went on. Those people, Sophia's in-laws, they paid for what they did. I made sure of that. His dark eyes flashed with a predatory glint that sent a shiver through Grace, but not of fear. It was strangely comforting to know that someone like Vincent had avenged his sister. She didn't doubt for a second that the Whitmans would face consequences too, if he had any say. Vincent gently released her hand. As if suddenly aware he'd been holding it, Grace immediately missed the reassuring pressure of his touch. She withdrew slightly, folding her hands in her lap. "So that's why," she murmured. "That's why you stopped for us." He nodded. "I saw you on that bench, with your girls. It was like seeing a ghost. I couldn't just drive by. Not when I had the power to help." He dragged a hand through his hair, clearly still troubled by the memory of his sister. "I can't bring Sophia back, but maybe, in helping you, I don't know, done something right." Grace's heart twisted. For all his outward confidence and strength, Vincent Moretti carried guilt and sorrow deep inside. On impulse, she reached out again, laying a hand on his forearm. "You did more than something right," she said softly. "You saved 4 lives tonight, Vincent. My life and theirs." She nodded toward the bed. "I don't even want to imagine what would have happened if you hadn't come. I'd lost all hope." Her voice quavered at the confession, but it felt important to say it. "I was ready to give up. But then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I was too afraid to speak." Her cheeks warmed, realizing how sentimental that sounded, but it was nothing less than the truth. Vincent looked genuinely taken aback. A faint flush crept up his neck. He opened his mouth, perhaps to dismiss her praise, but Grace gently squeezed his arm to forestall him. "Let me say this," she insisted, mustering strength. "I owe you everything. I can never repay what you've done, but I will always remember that you gave my children a chance to live and be happy." Her voice caught, and she blinked away tears. "Thank you, from the bottom of my heart." A long pause stretched between them. Vincent's gaze locked with hers, and Grace noticed his eyes were not black as she'd first thought, but a deep, rich brown, with flecks of amber that caught the firelight. For a moment, something unspoken passed between them in that quiet, crackling room. Gratitude, yes. Understanding, certainly. And maybe the first stirrings of something warmer, something fragile and new that neither dared name. Vincent cleared his throat softly. Looking almost bashful, he glanced toward the bed again. "They're beautiful children," he said, changing the subject slightly. "Emma, Sophie, and Lily. They remind me a bit of my sister's girls when they were small." "They are beautiful," Grace agreed, a mother's pride shining in her tired eyes. "And they're good girls. They didn't deserve any of what happened." "No, they didn't." Vincent's expression darkened. "The Whitmans have a lot to answer for." Grace bit her lip. "I don't want anything from them now. Not after everything. I just want to raise my daughters in peace, far away from that toxic family." "You should have that chance," Vincent said firmly. He sat back a little, regarding Grace with a thoughtful look. "What do you plan to do? Grace, if you had your way, where would you go from here? Do you have any other family or friends you can turn to?" Grace lowered her eyes, shame creeping in. In truth, she had no one outside the Whitmans. Andrew had systematically isolated her from her college friends over the years, and her parents were gone. I don't have anyone else," she admitted quietly. "I had an aunt in Florida, but she passed away last year. My old friends, we lost touch. I don't even have a phone now." She gestured vaguely, recalling how one of the servants had snatched her cell phone as they forced her out, perhaps to prevent her from calling for help. Vincent frowned, clearly displeased by how thoroughly the Whitmans had cut her off. "Well," he said after a moment, "there's no rush to decide anything tonight. You and the girls can stay here as long as you need. I have more than enough room." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Actually, it's been far too quiet in this house for a long time. Hearing little ones laugh again, it would be a welcome change." Grace's eyes widened. She hadn't expected such an open invitation. "Vincent, I couldn't possibly impose," she began, though the mere thought of leaving this warm haven and venturing out into the world alone again tomorrow made her panic rise. "It's not an imposition," Vincent said firmly. "Listen." He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his thighs, fixing her with an earnest gaze. "You need a safe place. I have one to offer. Let me provide for you and your daughters until you get on your feet. In fact," he hesitated briefly, then continued, "if you're willing, I could use some help myself. And it involves 3 little girls who might enjoy some playmates." Grace gave him a puzzled look. Vincent managed a slight chuckle. My 2 nieces, the ones Sophia left behind, and my goddaughter, I often have them visit here. They lost their mother, and I do my best to give them family and stability. They're wonderful kids, but I'm, well, a bachelor without a clue how to braid hair or bake cookies. He smiled ruefully. Maria does a lot, but having another nurturing presence around would mean the world to them, and to me. Realization dawned on Grace. He was offering her a role, a place in his life, not just charity. You mean, you want me to stay here and help look after your sister's children? She asked slowly. If you would, Vincent said. Not as a servant. Maria handles the staff and such, more like an honored guest who also happens to be a caring mother figure. Sophia's girls, Anna and Clara, are 5 and 7. My goddaughter Isabel is 4. They visit often, but the house still feels empty in between. If your girls were here full-time, it might encourage them to spend more time here too. He paused, then added in a softer tone. And beyond that, Grace, your daughters deserve to grow up somewhere they're cherished. I can give them that. I give you my word. No harm will ever come to them under my roof. Grace was momentarily speechless. It was astonishing. Less than a day ago, she had been cast out penniless, thinking she might actually die on the street with her children. Now, this man was offering not just a roof and food, but a home, and possibly even a purpose. Her heart pounded. She knew accepting would be life-changing. Could she trust it? Could she trust him? Grace studied Vincent's face. The sincerity in his eyes, the hint of vulnerability when he spoke of his nieces. Her intuition, battered as it was, whispered that this man's word was iron. He'd proven that by every action tonight. Still, a small part of her, scarred by betrayal, wavered. Why are you doing this for us? She asked, almost a plea. This is far beyond kindness. I don't understand what you'd get out of it. It wasn't that she believed he had nefarious intentions. She just genuinely couldn't fathom being worth all this trouble to someone. Vincent's expression softened. He rose from the armchair and crouched down directly in front of Grace, bringing himself eye level with her as she sat. Gently, he reached out and took her hand once more. The gesture was both respectful and warmly familiar. Grace's breath caught at the tender strength of his grip. I get to right a terrible wrong, Vincent said quietly. I couldn't save my sister, but I can save you. Maybe in doing that, I save a piece of myself too. He inhaled, and for the first time Grace noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his dark eyes. You asked earlier what I want. The truth is, I don't want to be the reason you have safety for one night or even a few weeks. I want to give you a life where you never have to live in fear or want again. Grace's heart skipped. The intensity of his words, the closeness of him, it was almost overwhelming. Was he saying what she thought? Her mind raced, unsteady. Vincent seemed to realize he might be going too far too fast. He released her hand gently and straightened up, clearing his throat. Of course, he added more briskly, it's entirely your choice. Stay as long as you wish. If and when you'd like to leave, I will personally ensure you have a safe place to go and means to provide for your family. I have many connections. I can arrange housing, a job, whatever you need. He gave a slight, self-conscious shrug. Consider it. My investment in a better world, if you like. Grace stood as well, drawn to her feet by an impulse she didn't fully understand. She realized they were now standing barely a foot apart. She had to tilt her chin up to meet his gaze. The firelight cast dancing shadows, making this moment feel outside of time. Her voice trembled with emotion. You barely know me. You are not just anything, Vincent interrupted, surprising her with the fierceness in his tone. You are a woman who has endured unimaginable cruelty, and yet still fights to protect her children. You are brave and strong, Grace, even if you don't feel that way right now. And your daughters, they're bright, sweet girls. Any man would be lucky to have such a family under his roof. He ran a hand through his hair, an almost boyish gesture of frustration at not finding the right words. More softly, he finished. It would be an honor to provide for you, truly. In that moment, Grace felt something inside her, something long since broken, begin to mend. It was trust, tentative, but real. She realized she trusted Vincent Moretti, more deeply than she'd ever trusted her husband who had vowed to love her. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Suddenly aware that tears were silently spilling down her cheeks, Grace gave a shaky laugh and wiped them away. You'll think I do nothing but cry, she said apologetically. Vincent's face relaxed into a gentle smile. You've earned a few tears, he said kindly. Almost without thinking, He reached out and brushed a thumb across her cheek, catching a tear she missed. The touch was feather-light, lingering for the briefest instant, but it sent a comforting warmth through Grace. Their eyes locked. For a suspended moment, they simply stood there, inches apart, the air between them thick with unspoken understanding, and a budding tenderness that took Grace's breath away. Vincent's hand hovered near her face, as if he was debating whether to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear. Grace's heart thundered in her chest. In that moment, she realized that what she felt for this man was far more than gratitude. It was too soon, too strange to name, but it glowed in her chest like the first embers of hope. A tiny whimper from the bed broke the spell. The baby, Lily, stirred and let out a soft cry. Grace blinked, stepping back gently. "I should see to her," she murmured. She moved to the bedside and lifted her infant daughter carefully into her arms. Lily fussed, face scrunching up, then settled as Grace swayed her gently. Behind her, Vincent cleared his throat, regaining his composure as well. "I'll let you rest," he said quietly. "You all need it." Grace turned halfway, one arm cradling Lily, and gave him a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said yet again, and hoped he could hear all the meaning layered into those simple words. Vincent inclined his head. He took a step towards the door, then paused. "If you need anything at all, I'll be right down the hall. Maria, too." Grace nodded. "We'll be okay. Good night, Vincent." "Good night, Grace." He lingered a second longer, as if wanting to say more, but then seemed to decide against it. With one last soft glance at her, and the now sleeping baby in her arms, Vincent slipped out into the corridor. Pulling the door closed, Grace stood there holding Lily, gazing at the door for a long moment. The room felt a touch colder without him, but her heart felt strangely full. She looked down at Lily's tiny, peaceful face, and then over at Emma and Sophie, snug and safe under the covers. A profound sense of rightness washed over her. They were safe, they had shelter, they were wanted. As Grace climbed into the big bed with her daughters, nestling Lily against her chest and draping an arm around the older two, she allowed her eyes to drift shut with a prayer of thankfulness on her lips. In the span of a single night, fate had led her from despair to the doorstep of an unexpected new life, and perhaps, just perhaps, into the arms of a man who would cherish both her and her children as they deserved. For the first time in 5 years, Grace fell asleep, not crying, but cautiously hopeful about what tomorrow might bring. 1 month later, sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Moretti Mansion's east wing, spilling into the playroom in golden patches. The air was filled with the sound of children's laughter. Grace paused in the doorway, holding a basket of freshly laundered little clothes, and smiled at the scene before her. Her Sophie was holding an impromptu tea party with Vincent's 7-year-old niece Clara in the reading nook. The two girls were giggling as they poured imaginary tea into tiny porcelain cups. On the plush rug, Clara's younger sister Anna was building a block tower with Emma and Isabel. The 4-year-old goddaughter, baby Lily, now stronger and chubby-cheeked, sat propped with pillows in a bouncer seat, kicking her legs happily as the older kids played. The room that once sat mostly unused was now strewn with dolls, coloring books, and stuffed animals, a delightful chaos of family life. It had been 4 weeks since that fateful rainy night, and each day the once quiet house felt more like a home. Grace stepped in and began folding the small dresses and shirts from her basket into a dresser, quietly watching the children with contentment. Sophie caught her eye and waved a pinky in the air. "Mama, would you like some tea?" she asked in her best fancy lady voice. "Oh yes, please, Miss Sophie," Grace replied playfully, setting the basket aside and taking a seat on one of the little chairs around the tea table. Clara carefully poured Grace a cup of pretend tea. Grace pretended to sip, extending her pinky just as Sophie had. The girls dissolved into giggles. As Grace laughed with them, she felt a lightness in her heart that she hadn't known in years. This was what she had always wanted for her children, a chance to be carefree, to laugh, to be loved. In the Moretti household, they had found that. Maria doted on all the kids as if they were her own grandchildren, and Vincent. At the thought of Vincent, Grace's smile softened into something warmer. Over the past month, he had seamlessly woven himself into their days, and increasingly, into Grace's thoughts. From the first morning after their arrival, when he had shyly offered to hold Lily so Grace could eat a proper breakfast, to just last night, when he insisted on reading bedtime stories to the whole brood, Vincent had become an integral, loving presence in their lives. And not just for the children. Grace had found herself looking forward to the quiet moments after the kids were asleep, when she and Vincent would sit by the fire or wander the garden paths, talking for hours about anything and everything. He listened to her, truly listened, whether she spoke about her dreams of finishing her education or simply the funny things Sophie said at lunch. In turn, he shared pieces of himself, his struggles taking over the family business after his father's death, his fears about not being a good enough guardian for his nieces, his secret love of old jazz music. With each conversation, the initial formality between them had melted, replaced by genuine friendship and a growing affection that felt as if it had always been there, just waiting to bloom. "Mama, can we show Uncle Vinny our tower?" Emma piped up suddenly, drawing Grace from her reverie. The block tower the younger ones built had impressively reached nearly 3 feet tall. Grace chuckled. "Of course, I'm sure he'd love to see it. Where is Uncle Vinny?" She had quickly learned that Vincent's nieces called him Uncle Vinny, and soon enough her own girls affectionately adopted the nickname as well. It still made Grace smile. Somehow it made this formidable man sound like a cuddly bear, but he never once corrected them. "He's in his study with the loud men," Isabel informed seriously, referencing the fact that Vincent had a business meeting with a few associates that morning. "But he said we can come get him when we're ready for lunch." Clara hopped up. "It's almost lunch now, let's go." In a flurry, the children decided unanimously that Vincent simply had to see the tower before it inevitably tumbled, meeting or not. Grace trailed behind as the gaggle of kids rushed down the hall, arms and hands linked. Sophie carried Lily, with a watchful eye from Grace to ensure she was steady, so the baby could be part of the excitement too. They arrived at the heavy oak door of Vincent's study. Before Grace could even tap, the door opened. Vincent stood there, apparently already alerted by the thunder of little footsteps. He held up a hand, feigning serious business-like demeanor, and addressed the pack of children. "Excuse me, do you all have an appointment?" The kids burst into giggles and swarmed him. "Uncle Vinny, you gotta see our tower," Anna urged, tugging his hand. "It's taller than me," Emma bragged. Vincent's stern act lasted all of 2 seconds before he laughed and dramatically checked his wristwatch. "Well, gentlemen," he said, glancing back into the study where 2 suited men stood smiling in amusement, "I'm afraid this meeting will have to adjourn. I have some very important architects awaiting my attention." One of the men, burly and intimidating to anyone who didn't know him as Vincent's security chief, laughed outright. "Of course, boss," he chuckled. "We'll continue later." The associates gave polite nods as they departed past the children, who barely noticed them now that they had Vincent's full focus. Vincent crouched and opened his arms just in time to catch Isabel and Sophie as they lunged at him for hugs. He hoisted one on each hip with practiced ease. "All right, show me this masterpiece of engineering," he declared. He then pretended to notice Grace standing there, and his face lit with a special warmth reserved just for her. "Good morning, Grace," he said softly. "Good morning," she replied, feeling a familiar flutter in her stomach at his gaze. It still happened. Every time their eyes met after a few hours apart, even just a morning, she felt that quiet thrill. She hoped her smile didn't give away just how smitten she was. Over the past weeks, affection had blossomed into something deeper. She hadn't said it aloud, neither had he, but she knew she was falling in love with Vincent Moretti. Perhaps a part of her had fallen that very first night, seeing the goodness behind his tough exterior, and every day since had only drawn her closer to him. They walked down the hall, Vincent carrying Sophie and Isabel, Grace walking beside with Lily in her arms, and the other girls skipping ahead. As they passed through a sunbeam from a skylight, Grace noticed Vincent subtly shift his body to shield the girls in his arms from the bright glare, without breaking stride or conversation. It was such a small thing, but it made her heart squeeze. The man who many feared as a dangerous Mafia lord was also the man who made sure a sudden shaft of sunlight didn't wake a drowsy child. The tower in the playroom did indeed impress Vincent appropriately. He gasped and praised and lifted each child up so they could put a final block on top. When the inevitable collapse happened moments later, he made it fun, stomping in comedic shock and letting them bury him in the scattered blocks until he cried uncle. By the time Maria announced lunch, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, a favorite for all ages, the household felt like a joyful circus. They gathered around the long dining table, children interspersed between adults. Vincent ended up with Lily's high chair on his left and Isabel on his right, while Grace sat across from him, helping Sophie and Emma with their soup. The meal was noisy and messy and perfect. At one point, Grace looked up to see Vincent balancing a tiny spoon carefully as he attempted to feed Lily a bit of broth. Lily blew a raspberry, spraying soup droplets onto Vincent's chin. The table erupted in laughter, Vincent most of all, He wiped his face with a napkin, chuckling deeply, and in that moment he caught Grace's eye. He gave her a wink that sent warmth flooding through her. Her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. After lunch, Rosa, Vincent's elderly aunt who sometimes visited to help Maria, took the older kids to the garden to let them run off steam. Lily had drifted to sleep, so Grace carried her upstairs to lay in the crib. When she returned, she found Vincent alone in the now quiet dining room, stacking dishes. "You don't have to do that," Grace said, approaching with a smile as she reached for the plates. Vincent shrugged, smiling. "I don't mind. Many hands make light work, right?" They worked together in companionable silence for a few moments, clearing the table and wiping spills. When the last dish was set aside, Vincent washed his hands, then turned to Grace, leaning back against the counter. He regarded her thoughtfully, a playful light in his eyes. "You, Miss Grace, look very happy today," he observed. She dried her own hands on a towel, unable to suppress her grin. "I am happy. It's hard not to be seeing all the kids laughing like that. Seeing you laugh like that." She added the last part more softly. Vincent's lips curved. "It's your doing, you know. This house was never as lively as it is now. You brought the laughter back." Grace felt a flutter of both joy and shyness. "I think the children had something to do with it," she demurred lightly. He shook his head, stepping a little closer. "It's more than that. The day you and your girls came into my life, it's like the lights turned on in a home I didn't even realize was dark." His voice was gentle and earnest, each word sending a thrill through Grace. She looked up at him, heart pounding. In the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, Vincent's face was free of its usual guarded shadows. He looked younger, hope shining in his warm brown eyes. Grace took a breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but she reached out and took Vincent's hand in hers. She had been bracing to have this conversation, waiting for the right moment, and perhaps it had come. "Vincent, I need to tell you something," she said quietly. His fingers squeezed around hers. "You can tell me anything." She felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she kept her gaze on his. "You asked me that first night what I planned to do, where I wanted to go. And at the time I didn't know. I was so lost." She swallowed, emotion thickening her voice. "But now I know exactly where I want to be. Here, with my girls, with—" She hesitated, then pressed on, her voice trembling with vulnerability and conviction. "With you." Vincent inhaled sharply. His free hand moved as if on instinct to cradle her cheek. The warmth of his palm sent a sweet shiver through her. "Grace," he murmured. There was a wealth of feeling in that single word. She turned her face slightly into his hand, gathering courage from the tenderness in his eyes. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Not as a guest, or someone you're obligated to help. I want to build a life here. A family. Our family, if you want that too." For a moment, Vincent just looked at her, and she feared she'd overstepped. But then his eyes shone suspiciously bright. He rested his forehead against hers, voice husky with emotion. "You have no idea how long I've wanted to hear you say that." Grace's heart soared. "Really? Really," he vowed. He drew back just enough to meet her eyes properly. "Grace, you and these girls have become the very center of my world. I wake up every morning excited just to see you at breakfast. I fall asleep every night thinking of ways to make you smile the next day." He let out a shaky laugh. "I was going to wait a bit longer to say anything. I didn't want to rush you or take advantage after everything you went through. But since we're laying cards on the table, I love you, Grace. I'm hopelessly, irrevocably in love with you." He paused, searching her face worriedly. "If that's too much or too soon," Grace answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. It was a soft, delicate kiss, a gentle meeting of warmth and promise. She felt Vincent exhale in surprise, then he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her flush against him as he returned her kiss with heart-stealing tenderness. In that kiss, Grace felt everything. The protectiveness that had saved her life, the kindness that had nourished her soul, and the passionate devotion that had grown quietly between them these past weeks. When they finally parted, both breathless and smiling like fools, Grace cupped his face in her hands. "I love you too, Vincent," she whispered, her eyes shining. It was the first time she'd spoken those words to a man, and meant them fully. "You've given me and my daughters more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave us hope and a home. You gave me your heart. And I promise you it's safe with me." A tear slipped down Vincent's cheek at her words, though his smile never wavered. Grace kissed the tear away softly, and he closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. When he opened them again, the joy in his expression was radiant. He cleared his throat lightly, an almost bashful grin crossing his face. "I had a whole speech planned, you know," he chuckled. "This isn't exactly how or when I imagined doing this." Grace blinked. "Doing what?" Instead of answering, Vincent gently released her and reached into his pocket. To Grace's astonishment, he produced a small velvet box. Her heart nearly stopped. Vincent's voice trembled only slightly as he spoke. "I've been carrying this around for a week, waiting for the right time." He went down on one knee, right there in the sunny kitchen, and opened the box to reveal a simple yet stunning ring, a solitaire diamond flanked by tiny sapphires. The breath hitched in Grace's lungs. "Grace Jennings," Vincent said, looking up at her with all the love in the world shining in his eyes. "You and your girls walked into my life and changed it forever. You healed something in me I thought would always be broken. I promise that if you stay by my side, I will devote every day to making you and our children happy. I will protect you, cherish you, and love you with all that I am. Will you marry me and make this unconventional little family of ours official?" Tears streamed freely down Grace's face, but her smile was brilliant as the sun. "Yes," she answered, barely a whisper at first, then louder as laughter and relief bubbled out of her. "Yes, of course I will, Vincent." Vincent let out a breath that was half laugh, half sigh of pure happiness. His fingers were steady as he slipped the ring onto her left hand, a perfect fit. Grace pulled him up into her embrace, and he spun her once in a joyous circle before kissing her again, deeply and sweetly. Unbeknownst to them, 4 little faces had been peeking around the doorway for the last part of this exchange, alerted by the unusual quiet, or perhaps an aunt's hint. A sudden chorus of cheers and clapping erupted, startling Vincent and Grace apart. They turned to find Sophie, Emma, Anna, and Clara jumping up and down in glee at the kitchen entrance. "Daddy proposed to Mommy!" Sophie squealed, clapping her hands over her mouth in excitement. Grace's eyes went wide at Sophie's innocent exclamation of "Daddy" for Vincent. She looked to Vincent to gauge his reaction. He appeared momentarily stunned. Then an expression of pure tenderness overtook him. He crouched and beckoned Sophie and Emma to him. They barreled into his arms. "Is it true? Are you going to be our new daddy?" Emma asked in a small, hopeful voice. Vincent hugged them tightly. "If you'll have me," he said softly, his throat thick. "I know I'm not the father you started with, but I promise I'll do everything I can to be the father you deserve." Sophie threw her arms around his neck. "We already love you. Uncle Vinny, can we call you Daddy now?" Vincent's answer was to hold her even closer, his eyes shining as he whispered, "I would be honored if you did." Emma joined the hug, and Vincent lifted both girls into his embrace. Grace watched, pressing a hand to her heart. The sight of her daughters beaming in Vincent's arms, calling him Daddy, was almost overwhelming in its beauty. Not to be left out, Clara and Anna ran to Grace, each taking one of her hands. "We're cousins now," Clara declared excitedly, swinging Grace's arm. "And Auntie Grace, you'll really be our aunt." Grace laughed through her tears and scooped Anna into a hug while squeezing Clara's hand. "Yes, I suppose I will be," she said warmly. She realized with a happy shock that she suddenly had family everywhere she looked. "Group hug!" came an announcement from behind the gaggle. Maria and Rosa were there now too, both dabbing at their eyes. Rosa shooed the kids good-naturedly. "Go on, give them some breathing space." But instead, everyone ended up crowding into a giant hug right there in the kitchen, Grace and Vincent at the center, surrounded by children and the 2 older women who had helped make this house a home. Amidst laughter and tears and a good deal of jostling, Grace found Vincent's hand and squeezed. He leaned down and kissed her temple amidst the chaos. "Thank you," he whispered in her ear. "For what?" she whispered back, amazed he could think she needed thanking. "For giving me a family again, for saying yes." He touched the ring on her finger as if to assure himself it was real, then looked into her eyes with a tenderness that made her soul melt. "You've made me the luckiest man alive, Grace." Grace felt tears slip down her cheeks once more, but they were sweet and joyful. "And you've made me the happiest woman," she replied. The children began tugging them towards the garden, chattering about flower arrangements and cake flavors. "Chocolate cake," insisted Leo, Vincent's 4-year-old godson, who had just arrived with his father. In a whirl of excitement, the household spilled outside. Already Maria was talking about celebrations and calling the family lawyer to expedite adoption papers for the girls, while Rosa talked of altering a wedding dress she had stored away. Grace let herself be led, laughing as little hands pulled at her, but before they stepped fully into the sunlit garden, she paused and looked back at the house for just a moment. There in the doorway stood the ghost of the woman she'd been a month ago, cold, frightened, on the brink of despair. Grace silently reached out and embraced that fragile version of herself, letting her know that they made it, that through the storm, they found refuge. As if on cue, the clouds parted above and golden sunlight poured down, warming Grace's face. Vincent squeezed her hand, and she turned to him, radiant with love. "Ready, beautiful?" he asked, smiling that special smile meant only for her. Grace nodded, returning his smile with one of her own, that brimmed with unshakable joy. "Ready," she said. With their children skipping ahead and their future shining bright, Grace and Vincent stepped forward side by side into the light of a new beginning, together. Late that afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in honeyed hues, a small, intimate wedding took place in the blossoming rose garden behind the mansion. There were no hundreds of guests, no lavish fanfare, just the people who truly mattered, the patchwork family they had formed. Under an arch of twining ivy and pale white roses, Grace stood facing Vincent, her hands nestled in his strong grasp. She wore a simple ivory dress that flowed like liquid silk around her, a dress Rosa had miraculously tailored in a matter of days. In her loosely pinned curls sat a delicate crown of wild daisies and ribbons, lovingly woven by Clara and Anna as a gift. Around her neck, she wore her mother's silver locket and the tiny heart charm that Emma and Sophie had shyly presented to her that morning, a trinket they'd bought together from a dollar store. "So you'll always have a piece of us with you, Mommy," they'd said. Grace had wept and fastened it next to the locket, treasuring it more than the finest gold. Vincent looked devastatingly handsome in a classic black suit, but Grace adored most the small, meaningful details, the way he'd let the girls tuck a daisy into his lapel, how he wore cufflinks engraved with the initials of all three of her daughters. His eyes never left hers, dark and tender and brimming with tears he didn't bother to hide. The minister, a kindly woman from a local parish, led them through their vows as the golden light of sunset bathed the garden. The children sat in the front row, Emma, Sophie, Clara, and Anna as flower girls with scattered petals at their feet, little Leo as an enthusiastic ring-bearer who had delivered the rings in a velvet pouch, and baby Lily in Maria's arms gurgling happily. Senator Whitman and his wife were nowhere near this celebration, and their absence was a gift in itself. Instead, Grace's new family surrounded her with genuine smiles and misty eyes of joy. Rosa, Maria, Vincent's security chief who'd become like an avuncular figure to the kids, Aunt Teresa from the Moretti side, Dr. Thompson, and a few other close friends who had supported them this past month. "I, Vincent, swear I will stand between you and the world, always," Vincent said in a clear voice, sliding the wedding band gently onto Grace's finger next to her engagement ring. His voice trembled with emotion as he continued, "I will protect you at any cost. I will love you in every circumstance, good or bad, and I will never leave you to face anything alone." His thumb caressed the back of her hand lovingly. "From this day forward, Grace, we face everything together." Tears shimmered in Grace's eyes, and one spilled over when she tried to speak her vows. Vincent caught it lightly with his thumb, smiling softly, which only made her heart swell more. She took a steadying breath, her gaze locked with the gentle man who had become her safe harbor. "I, Grace, promise to stay by your side in the light, in the dark, and every moment in between," she said, her voice steady and sure. "I promise to love you with all that I am. I promise to cherish and protect the family we've found in each other. You gave me a home when I had none." Her eyes flicked toward the children and back to him. "And a love I thought I'd never have. I am done running, done hiding. From this day on, my home is with you, Vincent, wherever that may be." A smile through her tears. "I am yours, now and forever." A sniffle or two sounded from the onlookers. Vin discreetly dabbed at his eyes, and Maria was openly weeping into a handkerchief. The minister beamed. "By the power vested in me by the state of Illinois, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Vincent, you may kiss your bride." Vincent didn't hesitate. He cupped Grace's face in his hands with infinite tenderness and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet, yet full of promise, a a seal on the bond they had forged in trust and love. Applause and cheers swelled around them. Leo whooped. Clara tossed the last of the flower petals in the air. And Emma and Sophie were clapping and crying tears of happiness all at once. When they finally parted, Grace laughed as Vincent, eyes shining, swooped down and lifted Sophie, then Emma, into a big family hug with her. "Group hug!" Leo shouted again, and soon all the children piled in. Clara, Anna, even little Leo and baby Lily, gently held between Grace and Vincent. Laughter and joyful sobs mingled as the 5 children and 2 newlyweds embraced, their family united in one loving circle. As dusk fell, they celebrated with a cozy reception under twinkling string lights in the garden. There was music. Vincent spun Grace around in a slow dance to Ella Fitzgerald's melodic crooning, while the children danced in a little cluster of their own. There was cake, indeed chocolate as Leo had demanded, smeared on many a tiny nose by the end. And there was toast after heartfelt toast, each more touching than the last. Maria praising the resilience of her dear Grace, Vin thanking Vincent for reminding everyone of the importance of loyalty and love, and Clara sweetly thanking Aunt Grace for making Uncle Vinny smile so much. As stars began to prick the twilight sky, Grace slipped away for a moment to stand at the edge of the lawn, looking back at the warm glow of her home. Yes, truly home, and the loved ones laughing within it. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the texture of her satin dress and the cool press of her rings against her finger. Everything was real. She felt a familiar presence step up behind her. And then Vincent's arms encircled her waist. He rested his chin on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Moretti," he murmured, the title infused with pride and affection. Grace leaned back into him, placing her hands over his. She never tired of his solid warmth. "I was just thinking about how far we've come," she said softly. "Not long ago I was sitting alone in the cold, convinced my life was over." She turned in his arms to face him, gazing up at his beloved face. "And now I'm here, with you, starting something so beautiful. It feels like a dream." Vincent brushed a strand of hair from her eyes. "It's not a dream," he whispered. "Or if it is, we're sharing the same one." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us leads to the very best thing. If you hadn't been out on that street that night," he trailed off, tightening his hold as if the thought of not finding her was unbearable. "We found each other in the darkness, Grace. We gave each other a new beginning." Grace's eyes filled with grateful tears. She reached up and caressed his cheek. "You saved us," she said. Vincent shook his head, covering her hand with his. "No, you saved me right back." They stood there in silence for a moment, foreheads touching, hearts full. Above them, the last clouds of the day parted to reveal a canopy of glittering stars. The air was cool, but in Vincent's arms, Grace was perfectly warm. Behind them, the children's laughter rang out as they chased fireflies on the lawn, their figures illuminated by jars of flickering candles set around the garden. Grace watched as Emma gently caught a firefly and brought it over to show Lily, who clapped her tiny hands in delight. Sophie was tugging on Vin's sleeve, apparently convincing the burly man to twirl her in a dance. Clara and Anna were helping themselves to second slices of cake under Maria's indulgent eye. It was messy and lively and real, a far cry from the stifling, loveless wealth of the Whitmans. As if reading her thoughts, Vincent kissed her temple and quietly asked, "Any regrets?" Grace tilted her head in thought, pretending to consider. "Well, maybe one," she said coyly. Vincent raised an eyebrow in concern until he saw her teasing smile. "And what's that, my love?" She tapped his chest playfully. "That I didn't meet you sooner. Think of all the time we wasted not being together." Vincent laughed, a low and wondrous sound. He drew her closer. "We have a lifetime now to make up for it." "A lifetime," Grace echoed, liking how it sounded. She rose up to kiss him again, slowly, under the blanket of stars. When they pulled apart, both a little breathless, she whispered, "Let's go join our family, husband." Vincent's eyes sparkled at the word husband. He offered his arm in an old-fashioned, gallant gesture. "Lead the way, wife." Hand in hand, they strolled back toward the laughter and light, toward home. Grace's daughters ran to them immediately, and Vincent swung Lily into his arms, while Sophie and Emma each grabbed one of Grace's hands. Together, they rejoined the circle of loved ones. In that moment, Grace felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over her. The lonely, broken woman who had sat on that bench in the rain was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her worth and was surrounded by love. As the night deepened, music and laughter continued to spill out of the Moretti garden, carrying with it a message of hope for anyone who might be listening. That even after the fiercest storm, the skies will eventually clear. That sometimes the cruelest ending life hands you is, in fact, the door to a new beginning brighter than anything you imagined. Grace Moretti pressed a soft kiss to her sleeping baby's brow and smiled up at the stars. Her story had many chapters yet unwritten, but she knew one thing for certain: she was home. And as Vincent's arm came around her and her daughters snuggled in close, Grace felt it in her bones. The kind of contentment and quiet joy that comes when all is finally well. She closed her eyes, whispering a silent thank you to fate for guiding her through the dark and into this beautiful dawn. She had survived the worst, and it had led her straight into the arms of her best future. After the rain, the sky had cleared at last, and Grace stood basking in the golden light of a love that would guide her and her family forevermore.